I'm very grateful to be in this extraordinary temple in southern Korea. And I want to thank the most venerable Jin Woo and also the abbot of the temple and the monks and the nuns who are supporting this very important event for all of Korea. And honestly, my heart has been heavy as I have turned my attention to what is happening in the world today. The genocide in Palestine and Gaza, the bombing of Lebanon, the genocide in Sudan, the great challenges in Myanmar. And of course, we cannot turn our attention away from what is happening in Ukraine as we're in this room right now. We are in what is called a polycrisis, a crisis of many different reflections: environmental, economic, political, and of course the violence of war, racism, and sexism. What is hanging over Korea, South Korea, this very day? Not only North Korea, but also China. So you might have gathered I'm a socially engaged Buddhist. I have been doing meditation practice since the mid-1960s, but because of my first encounter with Buddhism through the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, my own work as a social activist combined with the experience that arose for me in the context of contemplative practice, including working with dying people in the prison system and with homeless people, the unsheltered. And in preparation for this talk today, my mind also turned to what happened in China 1,200 years ago. It happened in the kind of climax of the Tang Dynasty. It was when the mercenaries turned against the emperor and then fomented a rebellion, the rebellion called An Lushan. And in the 8 years of that ghastly violence, 2 out of 3 people in China perished from famine and from war. At this time, there was a very great poet who was trapped in Chang'an at this time. And he wrote a very raw 2-line poem. The poem was called "The View This Spring." And the 2 lines are, "The nation is destroyed, mountains and rivers remain." I have worked with dying people for many decades. And you are Buddhist practitioners. You understand from your direct experience what it is to live in the truth of uncertainty and the truth of impermanence. The nation is destroyed. We die. All things will perish on this earth. Even our sun will perish one day. But also there is birth, there is a rising. And even as there's birth and death, the second line in the poem goes, "Mountains and rivers remain." There is that which is changeless, that which is eternal, that which has ceased altogether. And it is precisely the realization of these 2 aspects, the aspect of change and the aspect of cessation, that I want to address today. I want to address it in relation to the encounter with suffering. And for the purpose of our gathering, the suffering that dying people experience, the suffering of being subject to intractable pain, pain that cannot be controlled, the suffering of the deformation of the body in the dying process, the suffering of the loss of identity, the suffering of the grip of fear. And the question, what is it to offer presence in the midst of extreme suffering?
Yeah.
And what is it that the encounter with dying and death give us as practitioners, as human beings? My third Zen teacher was someone who had a very deep relationship with people who had no homes, with the unsheltered. He also was Jewish, and he brought us to the concentration camp of Auschwitz, where we would sit on the selection site, the place where Jews were brought during the Second World War. And the Nazis would say, "You will be put to death. You may survive." And Glassman Roshi gave a powerful teaching, which he called the 3 tenets, or the 3 guidelines. And as someone who had worked with dying people for many, many years, and also worked in the prison system on death row and maximum security, these 3 guidelines were very powerful for me to work with. How could I use this guideline to actually come alongside a dying person or a man on death row? And the first guideline was, sit with not knowing. It reminded me of the teaching of my first Zen teacher, Seungsang Sansanim, who said, "Only keep, don't know mind." What is it to be able to sit with a dying person and not have your fear arise, and also expectations about how you would like for this person's experience to be? So in this work with dying people, being able to open to whatever is arising without bias, in a completely unmediated way, this is sitting with not knowing. You know, being radically open to things just as they are. And the second guideline is bearing witness. What is it to connect completely, not turn away from, but to come alongside exactly what is happening in this present moment? And the third tenet or guideline is compassionate action, which arises from not knowing and bearing witness. Responding to the truth of suffering in a non-prescriptive, unmediated way. And I came to understand that the 3 tenets characterized the heart, the attitude, and the behavior of the bodhisattvas. In Zen we say, bodhisattvas do not seek easy situations. And the plant associated with bodhisattvas is the lotus. And symbolically, the root of the lotus goes deep into the mud of suffering. And as a caregiver of someone who is dying, or sitting in Auschwitz, or feeding the unsheltered, you are coming alongside, not separating from the truth of suffering that is in that particular situation. You're in the mud. So please understand, my friends, this view is the foundation that is about the courage to not deny the truth of suffering, but to connect deeply with it, to come alongside it, and to actually allow it to transform how we are in the world. And this is why I feel we have to have a strong practice that allows us to uphold ourselves in the midst of suffering. I think many of you are aware that I have been working with dying people for over 50 years. And I have become so aware not only of the suffering that dying people go through, but also the challenges that are experienced by those who serve the dying or serve the homeless or serve those who have fled their country. And I'm so grateful that a book about these challenges that I wrote some years ago is translated into Korean. And in the book I describe, for example, how important altruism is in our experience as human beings, but also as communities. You know, what it is to offer ourselves selflessly, unselfishly, to allay or alleviate the suffering of others. But I also describe how harming yourself can actually happen in acts of altruism, or even in the endeavor to serve someone else. You can actually harm them by your actions. And there's a term for this. It's pathological altruism. Another area that I explore has to do with empathy, our capacity to be in resonance, to sense into the experience of another. But the over-identification with someone who is suffering can actually harm ourselves. And this is called empathic distress. Another area that is very problematic for people who are working in the field of suffering is integrity. What it means to serve out of our deepest values related to respect, to dignity, and compassion. And when those values are violated by us or the institutions in which we serve, we experience moral suffering. Also, respect is so important. But what we often see in our world today is people treating each other disrespectfully. In my country, for example, almost 15% of nurses have left the profession of nursing because they have been bullied by their peers. And the last, what I call edge state, is that of engagement. That is serving those who are suffering in a way where there is respect, where there is integrity, where the environment that you're working in is a healthy environment. The institution that you're working in is a healthy, caring environment. But when you work in an institution where there is disrespect, where your work feels meaningless, or you're overworking, you can easily experience burnout. And one of the most extraordinary things that we have discovered in the field of neuroscience and social psychology and in studying group processes is that the way to transform out of toxic states into healthy states is through compassion. Compassion includes this capacity to attend deeply to another. And this is where you see the power and the value of a contemplative practice. That is, meditation itself is about cultivating what is called in social psychology attentional balance. That capacity is characterized by clarity of resolution and the ability to actually keep your attention on an individual or an object or the breath for a sustained period of time. But without attentional balance, you're not able to see things clearly. The second piece of compassion has to do with our capacity to feel genuine concern for the well-being of others. I mean, what is your motivation for giving care to the dying, or feeding the homeless, or giving shelter to an unhoused person? Why are you doing this? The cultivation of an unselfish, loving attitude which is dedicated to the benefit of others is essential for not only the well-being of others, but truly of our own well-being. Another aspect of compassion is having the capacity to look deeply into the roots of suffering, to discern and to investigate, to inquire what is going on here and what will truly serve to benefit the person who is suffering. And the fourth aspect of compassion is this commitment to act to benefit others. And as some of you know, I developed a tool that is used in many parts of Japan by clinicians and in my country and in Europe that allows us to cultivate compassion while we are interacting with others. I need to say this from my heart as we are facing so many problems in our world today. As we know from the Buddhist perspective, wisdom and compassion are. They are interconnected. And dedicating our lives to actualizing wisdom and compassion to the benefit of others is what is called renewing humanity. We know, for example, in my country, young people who are engaged in activities that benefit others have many fewer psychological problems, have much lower rate of suicide. Just like in my Zen center in Santa Fe, young people cook for the homeless. They sit with dying people. They rewild areas that have been devastated. They plant pollinator meadows for the bees. They do not deny the truth of suffering, but they renew their humanity by engaging in acts of compassion. The future of Buddhism rests with young people. What we are endeavoring to do in the few days that we are here in Korea is to bring a kind of renewing of Buddhism and renewing of humanity by understanding the profound value of a contemplative practice. A wonderful Zen teacher, now dead for a number of years, but Uchiyama Roshi has written, he said, the life of a Zen practitioner is directed by vow, not by ambition. When he wrote, he says, when you meet the life that is forever, that is the miracle. Going back to the poem, the nation is destroyed, mountains and rivers remain. Another way that we say the life that is forever is this way. The enlightened person, and these are the words of Roshi Norman Fisher, the enlightened person is simply the person who is not selfish, who sees things as they really are, loves them and acts out of that love. I began this talk calling to mind what is happening in many parts of the world in relation to war, but also what is close to my life, the encounter with dying and death. Truly, every moment gives us the possibility for waking up and also for benefiting others. You know, I said early on in this talk, bodhisattvas do not seek easy situations. I'm remembering the teachings of 8th century Tang dynasty Zen master Ma. He taught that responding to what's actually happening in this very moment, right now, it's an essential part of our life, of our awakening, of our whole experience. And then he said something like, burying oneself in emptiness is to suffer the torments of hell. As our hearts and minds open in the experience of meditation, as we open our hand to the world through the experience of meditation, hell comes to an end. Zen Master Ma realized that hell wasn't what was happening around him. Hell was actually turning away from suffering and trying to escape into your own personal peace. And then Ma said, and this was very hard times in China, he said to his disciples, benefit what cannot be benefited. Do what cannot be done. So I say to you, may we together as a community benefit all those who need our care and do what cannot be done. So I want to finish this talk with a few lines from Shantideva. And those lines are, for as long as space remains, and as long as beings remain, may I too remain to end the sorrows in this world. So thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
관계 있는지 없는지도 참 모르는 질문을 하나 드려도 될런지 송구스럽습니다만 실제로 외부에서 호스피스라든 역할을 하면서 다른 사람들의 어떤 고통과 죽음에는 굉장히 공감하면서 본인의 어떤 컴패션, 자비심을 발휘를 하는데 실제로 집에 와서 가족들한테는 저희가 좀 잘 안 되는 부분이 있는 경우를 보게 됩니다. 네, 그런 부분에 있어서 좀 좋은 말씀을 해주시면 감사하겠습니다.
That's a wonderful question.
너무 훌륭한 질문이십니다.
There is no genuine compassion without having a motivation that is inclusive. Inclusive that we benefit not just our patients, but all beings, whether they're our family or even the natural world. But I know from doing this work for so long that sometimes the hardest place for you to express your care for others is with your immediate family. And it makes a person who does that feel like an imposter, feel like a fraud. He is kind and loving as a doctor to his patients, but he comes home and yells at his wife. And this actually leads to what is called moral suffering, where you see that your public values are not aligned with your private behavior. And one of the things that is important for us to do, should a family member be in that situation, is to actually find a way to give that person feedback or take them to the temple so they can explore in contemplative practice the truth of their own self-deception. This is the mud of suffering that is potentially transformative. Do you have a reason for asking that question?
저 이제 어머니가 계시는데 저는 절에 다닌 지 지금 한 3년 정도 되는데 오히려 바깥에서 제가 절에 다니면서 조금 착해진 척 하면서 집에 계시는 제 노모한테 제가 요즘 못되게 굴고 있구나. 반성이 가만히 있을 때는 되는데 실제로 배울 때 제가 실천적으로 못하니까 굉장히 고민이 많이 됐어가지고 오늘 여기서 좀 많은 것을 배울 수 있을 계기가 될까 해서 왔거든요.
Thank you so much. So let me just say one thing. I'm grateful that you actually recognize the fact that you have an unsympathetic relationship with your mother. But what would be worse is you being a bad girl and not realizing you are a bad girl. That is the beginning of transformation, the recognition that you are actually causing another person to suffer, and it is actually causing you to suffer as well because your behavior is not kind. That is wonderful. Thank you. You're on the good path forward.
네, 그래서
Thank you for your talk. And this September, my dog passed away, and we lived together during 18 years. Yeah, so I'm so sad these days. And my question, and our family looked all dying process without any medical care in our home. So my question is, when I feel other beings suffering, how I deal my suffering, and is there any practical way? I want your recommendation. Thank you.
So let me say something about your dog. You know, for many of us, our most undefended relationship is with our dog or our cat, not with our mother. Mostly your dog did not scold you or look at you with blaming eyes. When my dog looks at me, I feel seen, I feel perceived, I feel not judged. Except when I'm packing my suitcase to come to Korea. Then my dog looks at me with very sad eyes. And when my first dog, or the dog before now, died, I was just completely heartbroken. I felt so sad because I felt that that dog loved me unconditionally. So that dog taught me how to grieve openly. That dog taught me I could cry so deeply. Really, that dog humanized me. But let's talk about human-to-human relationships. I quoted this poem at the beginning, "The nation is destroyed, mountain and rivers remain." The first line is the line that points to the relative, our human experience of grief, of loss. And the second line is mountain and rivers remain. That is the line that points to the truth of impermanence and the truth of emptiness. So when I am sitting with a dying person who is suffering deeply, from one point of view, from the relative point of view, I'm in connection, in resonance with that person. I feel somehow their suffering within my own experience. By the same token, from the point of view of metacognition, standing outside of my emotions, I realized I am not that person. And that view arises from my experience of emptiness. The nation is destroyed, or I feel this person suffering. Mountains and rivers remain. There is something eternal and empty which I have experienced in the medium of practice that is also present. I am that person, I am also not that person. And this goes back to the value of having a practice, a contemplative or a meditative practice. And the integration of equanimity or wisdom and compassion in your lived experience.
할리팩스 선생님이 이렇게 멀리서 오셨는데 뵙게 돼서 감사드립니다. 저는 이영길입니다. 할리팩스 선생님께서는 미국에서 임종하시는 분이니까 호스피스에 대해서 많은 경험을 갖고 선구자로 알고 계신데 한국은 이제 호스피스라든가 임종에 대해서 이제 발걸음을 옮기고 있는 것 같습니다. 그래서 한국 불교도 호스피스라든가 임종자를 위해서 앞으로 또 불교 신자가 평화스럽게 임종을 맞을 수 있도록 어떤 방향으로 좀 조언을 해주실 수 있는지 말씀 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
So this is a wonderful question. Thank you. There is a profession called chaplaincy, and that is a perfect profession for a layperson, a clinician, or a monk or nun. These are individuals who are trained to explore with people who are suffering spiritual and existential questions about the nature of life.
네,
What is the meaning of life, for example? Chaplaincy training can be received at Harvard University and also at Upaya Zen Center, where I am abbot. Chaplaincy training exists in Europe and also in Japan. The training entails the capacity to listen deeply, to draw out the wisdom from those whom they're coming alongside, to help families or colleagues to respect each other's differences, to understand how the institutional structures in which we're serving, whether a hospital, an educational system, a legal system, or an economic system, contributes to human suffering. To be able to sit with people of different religions and to equally respect their point of view. And to change one's attitude toward care of those who are suffering so that people understand this is sacred work, the work of spiritual care. Spirituality is not about religion. Religion is institutional. Spirituality is deeply personal. It's not about converting people to Buddhism or Christianity or Islam. It's about supporting others in looking deeply about what will serve them in terms of meaning and purpose, of how to bring both love and closure for dying people in their relationships with others. In our country, we have chaplains working in hospitals, in prisons, even in airports. We have chaplains who are working in business sectors as well as in the world of environmental transformation. So this is one of the things that we are beginning to see in South Asia, in Thailand, also of course Japan. Vietnam is opening this vocational pathway of chaplaincy. I think it also has a great potential for monks and nuns in this country. And I said the same thing in Japan over the years at the big monasteries. And now in our chaplaincy training, we have many doctors, nurses, and lawyers in that training in order to address that aspect of the human experience related to spirituality.
네, 반갑습니다. 아주 먼 길 와주셔서 너무 감사해요. 저희 정토마을 자제병원은 임종 환자를 전문적으로 돌보는 호스피스 전문 병원입니다. 네. 올해로 한 24년째 운영하고 있습니다. 네. 역시 이렇게 환자들을 돌보면서 가장 환자들도 힘들고 보호자도 힘들고 또 의료진들도 힘들고 돌보는 저희도 힘든 것은 환자가 겪고 있는 고통이죠. 신체적인 것, 정신적인 것, 또 사회적인 부분, 또 관계적인 부분 이런 것들에 대한 총체적인 고통인데 이 고통이 왜 이렇게 사람들마다 좀 차이는 있지만 심할까? 우리가 죽어감의 여정에서 이런 거를 생각해 볼 때 우리가 평소에 죽음에 대한 준비를 또 죽음에 대한 올바른 삶에 대해서 배움이 좀 많이 부족하지 않는가 이런 생각을 해봅니다. 우리 한국에 살고 있는 많은 분들이 특별히 불자님들이 이 죽음의 문제에 대해서 좀 더 이렇게 대면하고 알아가고 배워가는 이런 여정을 좀 했으면 좋겠는데 박사님께서는 좋은 방법이 있을까요?
So thank you for what you are doing. And I have the feeling that you have the experience to actually be a bridge for people in learning about being with dying. Yeah, it is education of family members, of clinicians, and also hospital administrators. We will all die. We will all experience loss. And the power of facing our mortality and understanding our priorities, what is really important, is it's inestimable. It is just beyond counting. I hope to, you can do this. You can do this. Be this bridge. Take the step. It will make a difference in your culture. Not only in your culture, but also in the culture of medicine, in people's individual and family lives. Please.
네, 꼭 하시기 바랍니다.
네. 감사합니다.